All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. All right. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Woo woo. Hopefully you can speak into the broadcast here. Go ahead and test it out and see if you can do so. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Please, please, please go ahead and share the broadcast. I'll be right back. I need some more light. Much better. All right. Y'all excuse me. I got this high top rolling chair that's always sending me in a different direction than my table. All right. Please share this out. Share this out. Share this out. Because we're going to get it cracking this morning. I know my topic says Dear White Parents. But really this is a broadcast that everybody can deal with. Because the reality is we are all dealing with it. Whether or not we are the parent of a white child. All right. So today, I'm taking a break from my theology piece, but we're still talking about theology, if that makes any sense. All right. Hopefully, if we get an opportunity, I will go into why so many gods today at the end, if we have time. But I want to try to take my time. I have a few notes here, but I want to try to take my time to walk us through some things that I think are important. And I'm taking the time to do this and putting it online so that I can share it with other groups that I'm involved in. And I will also have a record that I have spoken of this subject matter before any other thing goes down. All right. So what am I talking about right now? I'm talking about ideology and theologies that drive radicalism. All right. So if you want a specific topic for right now, I really want to talk about ideology and theologies that drive radicalism. And what kind of radicalism am I talking about? I'm talking about the radicalism that causes people to go out and do harm to another group of people. And right now, I'm not talking about radical Islam, all right? And I wouldn't even say that I'm talking about radical Christians. I really want to focus and hone in on radical white nationalists, radical white supremacists, all right? Because there are white supremacists in our country and there are white nationalists in our country who aren't necessarily driven to radicalism. So I want to make that distinction. You don't have to agree with someone's ideology in order to live this life, right? But when you disagree to the point of you're willing to go out and do harm to other people because you believe that your ideology is the best ideology or should be the prevailing ideology, when you are driven, when your ideology drives you to fear, and that fear then drives you to harm other people, we have a problem. All right. So most of us are aware of the situation that has been going down or that has gone down for the past 3 weeks, which really actually came to a head this past week with the Austin bomber. All right. So I went and started doing a little bit of research and I found out some things that as someone told me they hadn't really heard about in the news. And I said, well, you haven't heard about it in the news because I did the research on it. So the news hasn't gotten there yet. All right. They may actually get to the point of what I'm about to share, but we'll see. All right. But from what I researched and what I began to gather, the information that I began to gather on this boy, this young man, because he's not a boy, all right? He was 23 years old. Good morning. By the name of Mark Condit. Mark Condit. All right? We've been hearing the stories about Draylen, who was the musician that was killed by one of the bombs, and also the gentleman by the name of Mr. House, who's an older black gentleman that was killed by the Austin bombs. But as we know, yesterday, they finally began to hone in on the actual bomber himself. And as the police were closing in on him, he blew himself up in his vehicle. All right. And so, of course, there were mixed feelings on that. Some people were like, well, good, he's dead. My thing is, I wish it wouldn't have gone down that way, because he was still a soul. He was still a soul. He was still a human being. And he left them with lots of unanswered questions. All right. He left them with lots of unanswered questions. So now they have to kind of dig through his belongings to try to figure out what was going on with him, what was in his mind. You know, now they're trying to talk to the family and friends. And this is kind of what led me to deal with this subject today and deal with this broadcast today. Because in the interviews, all right, the family and friends are saying that they're shocked, that they are horrified, that anybody amongst them could have had this kind of thought process and ideology. They said they had no clue. They had no idea. Though the friend that was being interviewed said that he was a very serious person. He was a person who was very adamant about his viewpoints. He was a person that was deeply religious. And so the friend, it seemed to me, had a little bit more idea about the personality of Mark Condit. All right. But the parents were saying they didn't know he was in such a dark place. However, the friend said that he was going and attending a church. And we're going to get to this church in a moment. He was attending a church with his family weekly. All right. So it's not like he was estranged from his family. It's not like his parents or anything hadn't seen him in years and they just see him on the news and, oh my gosh, he's done this. He was in his parents' house. He was going to church with his parents weekly. And the friend said they were all having Sunday dinner together after church weekly. Okay. So I said to myself, he was going to somebody's church every Sunday. Let me go research the church he was going to. So I went and looked at this church that he's going to. They actually have a Facebook page. I believe it's Austin Stone Community Church out of Austin, Texas. It is a progressive church. They have 5 campuses. They have several lead kind of campus pastors. They have a main pastor. They have kind of like a full staff. I am actually hoping that they will come out and give some sort of statement, because now people are flooding their Facebook page and going off on the church. Hear me. They're going off on the church saying, you all are crazy. You all are radicals. You know, this person was at your church. So there are a lot of people who are actually blaming the church he was attending for his actions. All right. But I didn't do that. I said, before I jump to any conclusions, let me go to the church's website. and let me go and take a look at what they were actually teaching at this church. So I went to the church website and I began to click on some of the sermons and I began to listen to the sermons. And the conclusion that I came to was, if this gentleman, right, if he was going to this church and he had white nationalist views, white supremacist views, and he was a self-proclaimed conservative, all right, and his friend said that he was really, really adamant about his views, all right, and he was a deep thinker, all right, if he was sitting under this church's ministry, because I looked at the last couple of weeks' videos, and the last couple of weeks' videos actually talked about race. They were actually having active conversations on race at this church, which is rare to see a white-led ministry actually having these open conversations on race. So the church was actually having conversations on race. The pastor was preaching. He was actually preaching about how evangelicalism, white evangelicalism in America, tends to be on the wrong side of history. This is what this pastor was preaching. He was also preaching about the value of women's roles in ministry and women equality, which is something that white nationalists don't necessarily believe in. All right. So a light bulb came on for me and let me know that, wait a minute, if he is going to a church that is coming against his very strongly held ideologies about other people, all right, and he's getting this every single week, all right, it is challenging his ideology up front and center, and he's attending this church every week and then going to his parents and having Sunday dinner. You can't tell me that some of that didn't come up. All right. Now, let's be realistic. If you go to a church and they're preaching something that you are strongly opposed to, are you going to tell me that you have not had, or you have not left a service with your family and had at least one conversation about what you heard? All right. So this whole thing about the parents being shocked or not really knowing, all right, either he was very, very quiet and kept his mouth super, super zipped, and maybe his anger and his feelings towards what was being spoken, right, maybe that escalated and he decided that he was going to do something about it. But in looking at what the church was teaching, to me, it became very obvious why this guy might have gotten upset. It may have been those messages that challenged his ideology that may have put him over the edge. All right. So I'm definitely not saying that the church was wrong, all right, in bringing enlightenment to the issues. But what I am saying is we need to understand that even in a ministry setting, not everybody who comes into your midst agrees with you. All right. Not everybody who is sitting in a church actually agrees with the message. And we need to pay attention, because as I was sharing with my husband last night, I was like, well, a converted or a woke pastor or a progressive pastor does not equate to a woke congregation or a progressive congregation. So your pastor can be speaking about issues of the day, issues of society, and that pastor may be under the impression that he is speaking to people who, because they're in his church, pretty much agree with him. But as seen in this case, he was sitting in a progressive church. It wasn't like he was sitting or attending a church that was a conservative church. He was attending church with his parents on a weekly basis, and he was hearing the truth. All right. He was hearing truth that challenged his personal ideology. And I believe that that is a part of what might have sent him over the edge. Also, I saw in one report that he actually attended the same barber as the older black gentleman that he later bombed. And so they're still trying to look at what the tie is there. So what do I want to talk about? What do I want to communicate? First, I want to communicate that, number one, all right, just because someone is sitting in your midst does not mean that they hold the same ideologies as you do. All right. Just because someone is attending your services, just because they're visiting, just because they're getting the word, it does not necessarily mean that their worldview is being transformed by that word. As a matter of fact, their worldview and the challenge to their worldview actually can make them dig in even further to their own worldview. Many of us call that cognitive dissonance. When what you hear, all right, when the new information you hear begins to clash with the information that you've already received and learned and is embedded in your personality, the way you think, and the way that you operate, and the way that you do things. All right. So because of that cognitive dissonance, some people can actually reject the new information they hear in order to hold on to the information that they already know, sometimes because it is simply more comfortable to stay with what you know than to be challenged by truth that can change your whole entire world view. All right. Secondly, a pattern that I am noticing, whether it is, and I want to read you some of the, I was looking at some of the articles between last night and this morning, and this is what they are saying in terms of terrorism. All right. Because one of the concerns is that these kinds of things that are happening, the current administration is refusing to call them terrorists. They're refusing to call the behaviors terrorism. Some people are saying, well, it's not truly terrorism because terrorism has to have a political aim behind it. Well, if you look at this particular person's life, he said several times that he was his conservative views were strongly held, and he was driven by those conservative views. If he was hearing something week after week that challenged his conservative views, then I would say that there was some politicalness driving what he decided to do. The pastor was talking about conservatism, and he was talking about evangelicals being on the wrong side of the history, especially when it came to civil rights. He goes out and he only goes into a well-to-do African-American neighborhood and leaves bombing packages. I would say that that's political. All right. So one of the articles said on Vox.com said, since Trump took office, more Americans have been killed by white American men than any other without a connection. And these are white American men without a connection to Islam or any Muslim foreign terrorist group. All right. Think about that. He hasn't been in office long, and more Americans have been killed by white American men than any other without a connection to Islam or Muslim foreigners. And our country right now refuses to call it white male domestic terrorism. They refuse to call it that, but more people have been affected by that than any other crime of terror since he took office. That's problematic. Here are some examples, all right? I didn't have time to write all of them out. I just took 3 of them. In Nevada, the 64-year-old white man at the country music concert, 50 people wound up dead, 200 wound up wounded. In Baltimore, a 22-year-old man drove from upstate New York all the way into where I am, Baltimore, and randomly stabbed a black man on the street. He was looking for a black person specifically to stab on the street. In Portland, a 35-year-old white man was on a train, killed 2 people of color on the train, stabbed them to death. That's just 3 of the incidents. But so far in the United States, since Trump took office, there have been more than 100 terrorist incidents by what they call right-wing terrorists. Over 100. We haven't heard of them all right? Those considered left-wing, it has been less than 20 that have actually been identified with the left wing. And then Islamic incidents, there has been around 60. All right? So the point is being made that our country keeps looking outward and saying the enemy is outward. We got to focus on terrorists outward, the black and the brown. But the reality is white male domestic terrorism that is occurring. So then my question becomes, because a lot of the cases were men between the ages of early 20s, early 50s. So now I'm asking the question, what is actually going on? Because a lot of the parents of these men and young men and the family members are saying, we didn't know. We had no idea. We were clueless. We are shocked. So now my question is, where's the involvement? Where is the involvement? And if your son is engaging in certain activities that might appear to be suspicious, where is the intervention? Where is the sitting your child down or your young adult son down and saying, hey, are you okay? Is there something you need to talk about? What's going on? How are you doing mentally? How do you feel about what's going on? Also, I noticed that some of these incidences, there was a high incidence of the person being unemployed or having no work. And then I said to myself, the unemployment rate of Black Americans is about twice that of white Americans in this country. So, that being the case, and then the unemployment rate of Black men in this country is ridiculous. That being the case, why is it that unemployed Black men are not going and driving to the suburbs and leaving bomb packages on front doors? Right? Because some people are saying, well, it could be the fact that them being upset about being unemployed, that's an understandable thing. You know, people want to be able to work. They want to be able to care for themselves and their family. However, have you looked at the unemployment rate of Black people in this country? And we're not going around shooting up people and blowing up stuff. All right. If that happens, then we'll come back and rethink that. But right now, I don't see unemployment being a main driving factor behind what is happening. All right. Because if that were true, if unemployment just made everybody lose it, then there would be a lot more of that across racial spectrums, right? Or ethnic spectrums that would be happening. So my question then becomes, are we paying attention? Are the people in their lives paying attention to what they're dealing with, what they believe? Are they having conversations with them? All right. I was yesterday given an opportunity to read something. That could be Lady Barbara. She said they're looking for a reason to justify. I was given an opportunity yesterday evening to read a comment from a homeschool group. All right. Because this particular guy, Mr. Condit, he was homeschooled. And I didn't have permission to share it publicly. I wish I had, because I would have shared it. But in this conversation going on in this white homeschool group, they proceeded to talk about this bomber by saying he is one of ours. And then they proceeded to say that because he is one of ours, that you may get some pushback from your family about your involvement in the homeschool movement and your involvement in choosing to pull your kids out of public school and teach them as homeschoolers. And then they proceeded to say, you know, you may have to defend your position on homeschool because the bomber was a homeschooler. They also proceeded to talk about him being a bad apple or or one of them that went bad. Bad apple is fine, but we're not talking about a bad apple. We're talking about over 100 white, male, domestic terrorists. And I thought it was interesting because the conversation never mentioned anything about this homeschooler going into a predominantly affluent African-American neighborhood and targeting Black people. There was no focus on that. There was no focus on you need to, if you're a homeschooling parent, you need to make sure that your child is socialized. You need to make sure that your child is not just around white children and only white children. You need to make sure that you have curriculum that shows the value of not just your child and your ethnic group, but you need to make sure you have curriculum that shows the value of all people. There was nothing in the conversation, all right, that these homeschoolers were having that pointed to the fact that there was an underlying racial component to what was done. They were only concerned about how it would make them look as homeschooling parents, which is a part of the tone deaf problem that I see with white America. All right? Because this is not just about he was a homeschooler. Very few people are coming after anybody because their children are homeschooled. But they are already attacking the church. Because, yeah, they are already attacking the church because he was supposedly a quote unquote devout Christian. So they're going after the church. And here's another problem that we have is you're now having people trying to consistently tie terrorism to Christianity as a whole. because they're not just trying to tie it to white supremacy and white nationalism, but they're trying to tie domestic terrorism to Christianity as a whole. And that is going to be problematic to anybody who worships Christ, whether you're white, black, Latino, Asian, period. All right? So we got to deal with that. That's why I specifically went to the church's website that he attended to find out what was this church actually teaching. And when you get to the bottom of it, it was not the church's fault, all right, that he had this ideology. As a matter of fact, the church he attended was challenging his ideology, which is what I believe sent him over the edge, because he got some truth that he didn't want, and he was getting it on a weekly basis. All right. So I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but just go to the website and see what the church is teaching, and then you will realize that it definitely would have challenged what this particular guy thought. All right. I went and I started saying to myself, if I was a parent and I wanted to be involved in my child's life, and I began to, as I got involved, I began to see some things that concerned me, what would I do? So I began to look up some things on terrorism, and I came across a list that I found to be actually very interesting and very helpful, because as they began to close in on this particular bomber, the people who were reporting began to say that they were able to track him because they were able to track him by his receipts and by his online purchases, receipts and online purchases of the chemicals and things that he was making, and the tools and things that he was making in order to build these bombs. It later came out that he had gone to his local Home Depot to get some of the supplies to build these bombs. All right. So I came across this article that I thought would be helpful as we have this discussion today. And the article is called 8 Signs of Terrorist Activity. 8 Signs of Terrorist Activity. So if you are a parent today, if you're a white parent today, I want you to pay attention to what I'm talking about. And I want you to listen in. And I want you to think about if you have noticed any of these things or seen any of these behaviors. All right. These are also helpful if you're out in the public. These are actual things. These are actual signs that are used by our government to determine whether or not somebody may be about to engage in some sort of terrorist activity. All right. This information comes from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority of New York City, combined with the Colorado Homeland Security Division. All right. So these are their 8 signs that they use to start paying attention to their environment. And for you as parents, paying attention to your young adult or your child, they may be getting ready to involve themselves in some sort of terrorism. Number 1 is surveillance. So if you're taking notes, number 1 is surveillance. Surveillance. If you notice a person who is recording or monitoring an area on a regular basis, they're not talking about, oh, I'm going out for vacation and I'm sightseeing and I pull out my camera, and I'm taking pictures and I'm videoing. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about people who look out of place, who may record or monitor a place frequently. Surveillance. People who can be seen out in public drawing maps of different places, using what they call vision enhancing devices. So if you're a parent, what might that look like? That might look like you might be visiting their home, or they may live with you, and you go in their space and they have drawings all over the place and maps, and they're not an architecture student. They're not an engineering student, but they have all these maps drawn up of different places. You might want to pay attention. Okay. Number 2, elicitation. Elicitation. People who try to gain information about a place, about a person, or about a operation, especially people who ask questions about critical infrastructures. So they're asking questions about things like bridges and tunnels and bridge tunnel usage and doors that go to certain things and military bases and how they operate. You go to your son's house, or you're in their room, and you see they've got checked out from the library things on bridges and tunnels and military base operations. Pay attention. All right? I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. All right, here's another one. Another sign. Tests of security. Tests of security. This can happen when you notice someone driving by a particular area and they do it more than once. They're driving by. It becomes clockwork. These are people who are seen to be possibly observing law enforcement or observing the lack thereof of law enforcement. This is why when people say places like entertainment venues, schools, universities, etc., they call them soft targets, right? Because most people know that they are gun-free zones, or only the security maybe has a gun. So they test security. They test whether or not there are lots of law enforcement around or in the area. They try to actually penetrate security by accidentally sounding alarms. So they may actually try to sound an alarm or pull an alarm just to see the reaction or to see what would happen. All right. Here's another sign. Funding. Funding. I found it very interesting that this particular student, Mark Condit, he had stopped going to college. He was unemployed, but he still had funding to go and buy these supplies. So funding, transactions or internet orders, large payments, large deposits, large withdrawals. All right. And if you're a parent and they are depending on you for money, or they have accounts that are connected to yours, and you notice things like large deposits, large withdrawals, large payments from internet orders, but you don't see what they order from the internet, pay attention. Here's another flag: acquiring supplies. Acquiring supplies, such as purchasing explosives, ingredients for explosives, purchasing weapons, purchasing large amounts of ammunition, purchasing chemicals and storing them, and chemical equipment. Acquiring supplies. You check on your son and they have chemicals in their room. They have chemical equipment. They have ammunition, large amounts. They have weapons. They have military uniforms, military decals, military badges, and they're not joining the military. They have bulletproof vests. Pay attention. All right. Here's another one that they give out as a sign. People who look like they don't belong in a setting. And of course, they said, you know, we have to make sure that we're not profiling people. But we know they profile. All right. The sad thing about this particular point is that they're more likely to pay attention to a Muslim in the same setting than they are to a white American male who looks all American and clean cut because of bias. All right. If you've seen the picture of the Austin bomber, he doesn't look like someone who would be leaving packages on people's doorsteps and blowing them up. All right. So people who look like they don't belong in a setting, noticing their behaviors, noticing their demeanor, noticing, they even have on here, noticing if there's a language difference or language use, noticing whether or not they're asking unusual questions. So that's one of the signs. Here's another one, dry runs. And they said the person may actually try to enact or they may try to stage out their plan before they actually carry it out. So they said this is the best time to intercept the person. One of the things that they said on their news briefing is that they wanted the city to remain vigilant because they don't know where he went in the last 24 hours. They have no real tracking record of where he went the last 24 hours before they honed in on him. So he could have left more packages around the cities or surrounding towns. Staging. So this person may try to enact or stage their plan before. And then the last one they had was deploying assets, getting into position or sending other people to get into position. This could include them setting up and dropping off packages, leaving their weapons in strategic places for them to go back and have their things in place before they enact their terrorism. I know with the Las Vegas shooting thing, I know that they said that because of all of the stuff that he had in his hotel room, he had to have been bringing stuff in piece by piece in order to have that much stuff in his hotel room without people really noticing what he was bringing in. All right. So those were not my points. Those were the 8 signs of terrorist activity given by the Metropolitan Transit Authorities of New York City in conjunction and partnership with the Colorado Homeland Security Division. All right. So what am I saying? I am saying that because we are in the society in which we live in today, we have to be attentive. We have to be paying attention to our environment. We have to be vigilant. And if you have not read Dylann Roof's manifesto, it's on my page. All right? It is on my page. It's crude. It's rude. He talks about different ethnicities in his manifesto. But we need to read it. All right? We need to read it because we need to understand the mindset of people who go out and do this kind of thing. And we also need to understand that Dylann Roof gave a clarion call to white supremacists. He basically called them, no problem, Lady Judy. He basically called them cowards. He basically said, you all are not about this life. That's what he did. So he basically gave a call to terrorism to people just like him who think like he does about other ethnicities. He declared an unofficial war, especially on black people. And some of us are still asleep. All right? Some of us are still asleep. We don't understand that it's not about how you feel about what is happening. It's about understanding that people are at war with you, whether or not you're at war with them. Because you can be minding your own business, right? You can be operating in the love of Christ. You can be trying to have conversations and dialogues. But you have to understand, when people have this kind of mindset, they don't want a dialogue. They're not interested in dialogue. All they have in their mind is that you pose a threat to their future. You pose a threat to the existence of the white race. So the scripture says two things, and we do one of them very well. Jesus said, watch and pray. Wakanda forever, right? Jesus said, watch and pray. We do a lot on the praying side. All right? We have prayer vigils, we have prayer revivals, we have prayer conferences. We will learn the prayer watches. But that other side, watch, we need to work on it. We need to work on it. There's a reason why the Black Panthers were established. The original Black Panthers in Oakland. There's a reason why they were established. They were established because terrorism, black people in their community, was being terrorized. So the men and the women rose up. They formed an organization. They began exercising their Second Amendment rights. And they said, we're not just going to let people come in here and terrorize our community. All right? Yeah, they actually had a community watch. They didn't harass police officers, but when the police officers came into their community, they stood watch and made sure that the people in their community were not being abused. Now we not only are dealing with rogue officers, but now we're dealing with rogue citizenry. Because here's what happened in Germany. And you can go and read it and you can go and study it. It's out there. The steps, they fed and clothed people as well. Yes. The steps that led to a genocide in Germany. We're actually going through those steps now. When the citizens of Germany saw how badly the Jews were being treated, the European Jews were being treated, and that nothing was being done to give them justice, when they saw that the officers were rogue, the citizens began to turn rogue, and the citizens began to beat up on and destroy the citizens, the European Jews. They began to beat them up and do heinous things to them, because they realized that no justice was being served to the Jews. And if they were not getting justice by the people who were actually in charge of receiving and delivering justice, if they were ignoring the rights of the Jews, then the citizens caught on and realized, wait a minute, if the police are beating them up with impunity, then I, as the citizen, can do the same thing. So then the citizens started beating on them. The citizens joined in. And then as the mindset of the citizens began to turn against them, to say, yes, the government is saying that they're not worth anything. So then the citizens began to agree with the government that they were not worth anything. And that led to them agreeing that they were not worth keeping alive. And so the government began to pass the edicts The government began to devalue them. The citizens joined in devaluing them. And then it became very easy to lay out a plan to exterminate them all, because everybody then was on the same page to do that. And we are still asleep over here in the United States. We don't understand the methodology that is going on. When you start rolling back civil rights, when you start rolling back the rights of citizens, when you start rolling back people's ability to vote, when you start closing voting centers and denying people in that way of the right to vote, when you start gerrymandering so that even if they do vote, their vote won't count or their vote won't have as much of an impact on the elections, when you start doing stuff like that, we should already know, we should already be seeing the signs on the wall, and we should be being proactive and not waiting for the other shoe to drop. When you have the leader of the free world disparaging people of color all around the world and saying they live in blank holes. Okay, when you have the leader of the free world who does not want to feed veterans, and the money that could be used to feed veterans, he wants to have a military parade. We're in trouble. We are in trouble. We are in trouble. And this is where I want to say, put the tambourine down, turn off the shouting music, and I'm going to need you to watch and pray and prepare. I know this is not popular. I don't intend for it to be popular. I'm really not concerned about the popularity of what I'm saying. I'm concerned that we are not awake. That's what I'm concerned about. And so it has taken them, it took them 3 weeks to figure out who this guy was. He was bombing an African American community. Now, let me ask you a question. If he was not bombing an African American community, if he was bombing a prominent white community, do you think it would have taken them 3 weeks to figure out who he was? I'm running out of time. So, all of that being said, let's see. Let me see if we can get through one on here. Y'all pray for me. Pray. I don't think we want to go through this right now. We're going to save this for next week. I don't want to roll through this quickly. Next week we will cover Vodun or voodoo. All right. I'm going to end here for today. So, in all of our praying, let us make sure that we are watching as well. If you are the parent of a white American male in the teens all the way up to the mid-20s, I'm going to ask you to pay attention to your child. I'm going to ask you to get more involved in your child's life if you have not been. If you are a homeschooling parent, I'm going to definitely ask you to pay attention to what your child is doing on their off hours when you're not schooling them. If you're a homeschooling parent, I'm going to ask you to look at your curriculum and ask yourself, is my curriculum, how can I put it? Is my curriculum devoid of the kind of cultural education that my child needs in order to get along with people who do not look like them in the world? And if you are struggling with that, if you're struggling with that, I'm going to ask you to go to a website called the BlackHomeschoolNetwork.com. The BlackHomeschoolNetwork.com. And I'm going to ask you to look around on that website. See what resources they might offer that can help you. I'm going to ask that you go to urbanintellectuals.com. Pick up some learning material, some Black history flashcards. All right? Teach your child about other people. Teach your child about the brilliancy and the greatness of Black Americans and their contribution to this society. Add this to your curriculum. They're excellent cards. urbanintellectuals.com. What am I saying? I'm saying parent in denial and child is not listening, but keep hope alive. I'm saying that ignorance breeds fear. What we don't know, we tend to fear. And when fear is bred in the heart, it leads to people doing things that leads to terror. All right? It leads to people doing things that leads to terror. So, my hope and my prayer is that a generation will continue to be raised up. A generation will continue to be raised up that says, we are not going to take on the previous ignorance of our forefathers. We are not going to perpetuate the racism and the hatred. We are going to do better. And so I have some faith. I have faith in Generation Z that they're not going to perpetuate the previous generation's era. I have faith in Generation Z. But what I need is I need the current generations that are still perpetuating or still not teaching and leaving their relatives and their children in a place of ignorance. I need us all to jump on the same train in the same boat. And I need us to begin to counteract the ignorance. That's what I need. My generation, I'm going to need us to step it up and counteract ignorance. I am 40 years old, so I am not Generation Z. I need us to step it up and counteract ignorance with truth. That's what I need. That's what I need. Generation Z, 20 and under, they are on it. They are like, we're tired of the nonsense. We're not putting up with it anymore. The rest of us, we got to step it up. We have to step it up. That's just what it is. We have to step it up. All right. So we take personal responsibility, right? And then we look at our circle around us and we say, are you taking personal responsibility? Are you having the necessary conversations? Okay. That's everybody. Black folks, white folks, Asian folks, Latino folks, whoever's in your circle. You cannot afford to look around in your circle and people still be ignorant. All right. If they're espousing ignorance, if they are perpetuating ignorance, it's time for you to speak up and say something. If you see something, say something. If you see something, say something. If you hear something that's ignorant, address it. Don't let it stay there. Don't laugh nervously like, oh my God, did they just say that? No, actually address it. All right. That's the way we're going to move forward as a people. That's the way we're going to move forward as a society. All right. So this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I hope that I have said something that was helpful to you today to get you to thinking. All right. Step it up. Exactly. Tell them even if they don't want to hear it, say it anyway. Say it in love, but say it anyway. All right. So thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. Don't let people stay in ignorance, because ignorance breeds fear. Thank you again. Take care, and God bless. You know what to do. Hit the share button.